All right. Welcome everyone to our webinar today, SD-WAN and what it means for your organization. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Maddie Regis. I am the marketing coordinator with NetGain Technologies. So without further ado, I would like to have both of our speakers introduce themselves. So let's start with Jason.
Good morning, Maddie, and to everyone on the webinar this morning. Thanks for taking the time to join us for this discussion. My name is Jason McRoberts, and I have been with NetGain Technologies for almost 16 years. Focus mostly on networking and unified communications, but have a depth of knowledge that goes across to Microsoft and VMware, other networking server technologies as well. Have been in the industry my whole career. Started in the workforce around 1996, and in some and have been in telecommunications of some sort since that time. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Bill.
Good morning. My name is Bill Bryant, and I've been working at NetGain for most of the years since 1996. I too have about a quarter of a century worth of experience in IT. A majority of that in networking and Microsoft-related technologies, but with that many years under the belt, I've touched a lot of different areas.
Maddie, you're muted.
So sorry, you all. Try not to interrupt our presenters. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. And let's go ahead and jump into our content here. So I'm going to start off with Jason, and we're going to kind of just step it into some of the terms that we're going to be using today so that our entire audience can understand what SD-WAN is. So starting off with that, Jason, why don't you explain what software-defined networking, or SDN, is?
Sure. So as Maddie just said, software-defined networking (SDN) really is an industry buzzword that has that's come around in the last few years. Many vendors have begun to use this, and basically, just want to take a moment here to kind of demystify the term a little bit, because I know when I first started to see it, having a vast amount of networking experience, I was kind of like, what is SDN? And it seemed kind of mysterious, if you will. So, in very simple terms, we still have network switches, network routers, network firewalls. All of those things are still serving the purpose as they always have. Places to plug things in, things that route, things that keep your organization safe. But what we're doing with SD-WAN, or I mean SD networking, is we're actually abstracting the control, not the control, but the actual programming and provisioning of that device off of the device into typically like a cloud management platform, but they can also be data center centric. And basically that has a few advantages. Number one, we have this nice single pane of glass that we can look at. Fast provisioning, ease of troubleshooting, and I think I've already said single pane of glass. Yeah, those were the things I wanted to mention. And as we're discussing today, we're discussing SD-WAN. I'm going to toss it to Bill to continue on down that road a little bit.
Yeah, so as Jason said, the software-defined networking is doing a lot of the things that we have done in the past very manually in a more automated way. And the cloud, for the most part, are offering the orchestration of that automation to allow us to more simply and more reliably take control of this equipment and the features that are available to us. So moving on to the definition of WAN, or wide area network, historically that has been applied to businesses that have multiple locations that are connected via some type of service. And the services that you may have heard in the past that would facilitate a WAN would be an MPLS network, or site-to-site VPN, or going way back to frame relay even, which I don't think there's a lot of that around anymore, but just trying to make some associations for things you may have come across. I've been doing wide area networking since the connectors to get a 1.5 meg connection was as big as your fist. So things have changed dramatically since then. So I mentioned site-to-site VPNs, and one of the primary underlying technologies there is IPsec, and IPsec has become less complicated over the years to allow it to perform a basic configuration and to get it to operate. But when you went to multiple sites or needed any type of resiliency, it became pretty complicated. And that's kind of the magic of the automation of the WAN, is to orchestrate all those activities and make it perform very seamlessly to you.
And Bill, maybe you could speak a little bit to sort of in the post-pandemic world, how does the wide area network and SD-WAN, how does that apply to organizations today?
Yeah, great. So I mentioned that in the past, the thought of a wide area network meant that you had a business with multiple locations. And I would challenge that in today's world, all of our businesses have multiple locations because we have people working from home. And another extension of the concept of WAN is the fact that most of us at this point consume some cloud service or consume a service from some type of service provider that we have network connectivity to, whether it be your Office 365 for your email, or your banking core provider that is an extension of your network, or if your ERP system runs in the cloud, you can make the case that that composes your wide area network.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for that insight. So I think now that we've sort of got an overview of what SD-WAN is, I think we'll move on to the meat of the conversation, which is what everyone wants to know, which is why you should care about SD-WAN. How is it going to help your business? So let's go over some of the business benefits of SD-WAN. Jason, I'll flip it over to you first because I think you've got a good story about this. One of the first benefits that we have on the list is cost savings. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so let me just introduce you to our sponsor today, and also who are most of this conversation centered around, and that's Aruba. Aruba is a division of HP Enterprise, and they are they're a networking company. So they produce networking, switching, wireless, and that's their wireless is where they first came from. Um, Wireless, and also this SD branch solution that we'll be discussing today. So I think a good place to start here, as far as how can we save money, and to kind of frame that, I kind of have to discuss, and maybe many on the call today already know, because you realize the own realities of your monthly spend around your wide area networks, whether that's a AT&T, a VPN, or as Bill said, MPLS, or even your internet circuits, or what have you. So we're not saying that SD-WAN will automatically save you money, but there's a high probability that you can shift the way you're handling your existing bandwidth to something that is not as costly. So just want to start with a story about a client here in Arkansas, where I'm located. They're a healthcare client. They have 12 locations plus their corporate data site. And they were spending about $20,000 a month. One of the issues that they had was they had many rural sites. Like half of their sites were in rural locations where bandwidth is fairly hard to deliver. So there were many sites where AT&T was crossing from AT&T territory to a CenturyLink territory, or even to a um, a cooperative, a telephone cooperative. And the problem with that, and I'm probably kind of preaching to the choir here, but the problem with that is when we cross from one local exchange carrier to another local exchange carrier, is the other local exchange carrier, for instance, if it's an AT&T network and I'm needing to provide some sort of bandwidth off of CenturyLink, well, AT&T has to buy that from CenturyLink, and then CenturyLink sells that back to AT&T, and thereby passes the cost back to you. So what we see in those situations is the bandwidth is very small for very high cost. And I mean, we're talking like 1.5 megabits per second, T1 speed, or bonded T1 speed at 3 megabits per second. And that's exactly the issue that this organization had. They had a lot of low bandwidth sites. They're trying to do telemedicine over these sites, and they were unable to really effectively do that with experiencing a lot of issues. So they began looking around and asking questions, and I said, "Hey, we can do that with Aruba's solution." And so what we saw there was $20,000 a month to a very reliable, in a lot of situations at the branch, with multiple connections now. About most of them have a dedicated internet connection and a broadband connection where available, and their monthly spend is somewhere between, including voice now, somewhere between $10,000 and $11,000 a month.
Yeah, so that's about
Yeah.
a 50% cost savings there. So yeah, Bill, anything to add about the cost savings?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously, Jason mentioned a situation where there was a large opportunity to actually reduce expenses, but sometimes cost savings doesn't necessarily mean reducing expenses, but it means being sure that you can enable your people to be productive um, more frequently or more consistently. So SD-WAN makes it easy to bring in multiple types of bandwidth, whether that's internet type bandwidth or wired, wireless, or even to blend an MPLS or more of a premium type network all together and provide a more resilient experience for your end users. We've been in Kentucky and Jason in Arkansas, and a lot of the areas we serve are more rural areas, and there is the disparity of bandwidth is very real in those rural areas. And you see people with MPLS networks, for instance, that have regular circuit outages, and the carrier might offer a backup solution that is LTE based or some type of cellular technology based. Well, truth being told, in those areas, it's unlikely that the cellular experience is going to be much better than the MPLS experience. So although it is nice to have the option, sometimes it doesn't work out as great as you might expect it to. So this gives us the ability to basically find the best bandwidth we have and bring it to the table and utilize it to the best of our ability. So I think Jason will have an experience to share about this too, but I was recently working with a customer that uses the Aruba SD branch solution, and we were working on some scheduled maintenance in another country, and the person on site was sharing their screen with us so we could look at some configuration information. And one of the things we had to do was take the primary connectivity provider out of the picture for a few minutes, and we asked him to move a cable, and we moved the cable, and we were very surprised to see that the screen share session continued to work. And while they did have a secondary source of connectivity, it was a provider that hadn't proved to be very reliable, and we didn't really expect it to work because of just the quality of the service they were providing. and lo and behold, the network completely transitioned over and done the best that it could do with that connection. So the ability to have a very seamless failover, even on poor quality bandwidth, worked out very well for us. Jason, I think you have a similar experience to share.
Yeah. So we this particular client that I've been mentioning, this healthcare client is one of our managed services clients here at NetGain, and we began getting some alerts one day in our network operations center, and very quickly we investigated, and we were able to see that there was a routing issue between, I believe it was 3 or 4 of the branches up to the data center, from a particular internet connection to the internet connection at the corporate data center. And so as we investigated that, we were like, well, we're going to have to get the carriers involved here. But the success story here is the people at the branches never lost connectivity to the data center. They didn't even have a clue anything was going on. So that was actually an issue that we were able to take on and remediate. And I actually had to notify our point of contact that they had an issue. And that's a very good conversation to have. And I think that's the conversations as IT professionals we want to have with our management and our points of contact is, we had a problem yesterday. You didn't know it. We just kept working. But, this is what our investment has done for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, like Bill said earlier, productivity is one of the most important things. So the more uptime you can have with your technology, the better. So I think that kind of takes care of our increased reliability bullet point here on the slide. So let's go ahead and move on to flexibility. Bill, I'm going to flip it over to you so you can speak on that aspect a little bit.
Sure. So when it comes to dealing with wide area networks, oftentimes you would find yourself locked into an extensive carrier contract that, first of all, usually took a long time to get off the ground because getting site installations done and things of that nature. The telecom industry is notorious for having long lead times in getting circuits installed, and usually the larger type of carriers, such as an AT&T or Windstream or someone of that nature that you deal with, the likelihood of a longer lead time as opposed to using maybe a local co-op or somebody that is more intimately involved in your community would be. So one of the things that I like about SD-WAN is that it gives you autonomy from those carrier relationships, and that it allows you to be in a position that if you're opening a new branch or a new factory or just needing additional connectivity in a new location, you can choose what's most available and most convenient for you. And there will be a way to integrate it into your SD-WAN solution. So it really gives you a lot of control back within your organization to choose the best options you have, as opposed to being locked into this more complex contract that oftentimes feels like it has you hamstrung to their schedule as opposed to what you need to get done as a business.
Yeah, Jason, anything to add to that? Oh,
Yeah,
you got me.
Yeah, to that end, the network that I've been talking about, we actually ended up with AT&T connections and Suddenlink connections, which is a cable broadband provider here in the Arkansas area, another cable broadband provider called Fidelity, some CenturyLink connections, and as I even referenced earlier, we've got a couple of rural cooperative telephone companies here also in the mix. So, those carriers that were already in the mix before, but were providing that much lower bandwidth, we were able to get much higher bandwidth for less spend and more effective connectivity in those locations.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that often come up when you start having that conversation was, well, how do you keep up with all of those additional vendors that you might have to deal with? And it's a legitimate question, but the first way I like to challenge that thinking is that, well, first of all, we don't care as much because we have resiliency built into the network, and we can, in most cases, continue to deliver functionality even without the users knowing, as Jason mentioned. So the priority of dealing with those carriers is less than it has been in the past because we have given ourselves other options.
Mm-hmm. And just off the back of that, Bill, you know, in these situations, we do end up with many carriers because we're looking for like you know, in the in the thought of flexibility. I need, you know, I've just been handed this responsibility to roll out this new branch in 30 days. I'm going to want the absolute fastest cost-effective bandwidth in that place that I can find. So you are going to end up with a lot of carriers. So there's lots of folks out there that do brokerages, and we have some people that we work with. NetGain does, and so they are able to harness together all of that connectivity and deliver it in one single package. So it's not us calling CenturyLink for an outage or AT&T for an outage. It's one number. We call one number, say we have an issue at this place. They take it, they run with it, and work with us to ensure that's resolved.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty good deal. So I think sort of speaking to that, our next point is about the efficient use of bandwidth. So Jason, maybe you could speak a little bit to that, jumping off your point about multiple carriers.
Yeah, so I mean, SD-WAN, SD branch, as a platform is any bandwidth, anywhere, anytime, basically. So you know, Bill's already talked about. You know, we've thrown a lot of terms around, some acronyms, but any internet service provider, any MPLS connection, any AVPN connection, any LTE connection. The point is we can aggregate that bandwidth, and we also intelligently steer the bandwidth, steer the applications across the bandwidth in a way that's the most cost effective for the organization. So let's take, for instance, that we still do have that legacy or a more modern AT&T AVPN network, right? So we can put that AVPN network into our SD-WAN gateway along with an internet connection. Well, one of the things that we probably already know is voice is critical. It's a critical protocol. So we have to ensure that that voice receives classification and prioritization. AT&T's AVPN network is well suited for that. You know, you can send voice across the internet, and it's becoming a lot more popular with increasing bandwidth. More and more voices going across the internet every day without any form of quality of service. So we can send it across the internet if we need to, but if we have a guaranteed network uh, that honors prioritization, we probably want to send it that way. So if we have that connection, we can tell the gateway, hey, I want you to send the voice across the AVPN network. If the AVPN network, for whatever reason, is not reachable, then I'm just going to have you do it at the other route. And so it does that intelligently. We don't have to interact. Like, we set it and forget it, literally.
Yeah, so following up on that efficient use of bandwidth is one of the things that makes Aruba well suited for this type of situation is that Aruba was founded by some guys that had worked in other companies that provided enterprise wireless, and they left and basically went on their own with the mission of delivering better enterprise wireless. And they began developing their own wireless access points, and they developed it on basically some chips that had firewall functionality built into them. And what that enables is seeing the traffic at a very low level and being able to look at session states within network traffic and to be aware of what type of traffic is flowing across the network, like Jason mentioned, voice, but the recognition could even be at if it were a banking application or a website related, or your ERP system, or your use of Microsoft Teams, or Zoom or whatever web meeting experience, it's really easy in these solutions to identify that traffic and then set policies so that that traffic is appropriately prioritized and uses the best resource you have to facilitate that traffic. And the and again, a lot of the underlying technology has existed for a long time to make these things happen, but because we now have this automation engine behind it all, it's practical to make it happen and to maintain it. And one of the benefits that you get from that orchestration is not only from a configuration standpoint, but in order for the orchestration engine to have the information it needs to make all of these decisions, it has to collect a lot of information and send it back to that orchestration engine. And because of that, we have information to provide you visibility into what your network is actually doing. So Jason, you want to pick up and comment on that visibility aspect?
Sure. So part of the Aruba SD branch solution is Aruba Central. So, I referenced way in the beginning in the software-defined networking, kind of defining that the single pane of glass aspect. And granted, single pane of glass is not new, and it's been around a while. But when we put our SD-WAN solution, our switching, and our wireless into that single pane of glass holistically, we begin to develop a whole new picture of what's going on in our network. And in those times where something's going awry and we don't know what's going on, it's the place where we can go identify and uh, troubleshoot the platforms.
Yeah, so in addition to that, I mean, just basic performance metrics. If you are paying for a premium bandwidth provider, you can see the system is constantly monitoring the health, not only from a probe type perspective, but also from a um, metrics about the actual application traffic that's coming through the system, and you have some visibility into that. And as well, you can see it's easier to see than ever before how much of your bandwidth is being consumed, what's consuming it, and transitioning a little more into um, this factor that we believe begins and ends in every IT conversation of security. Um, Depending on the level of integration that you choose to have, it's easy to go all the way down to the user level to in Aruba Central, type a computer name or a username and see where they're connected. And then once you know where they're connected, to see what they're doing on the network or what the device is doing on the network. Um, One of my favorite things about the Aruba solutions is the fact that it is software defined philosophy that extends from the enterprise network, and now all the way down to the smallest businesses, and enabling to have these more complex features to provide the necessary security for the network. And I'm going to pass it back over to Jason to talk about um, the edge security aspect again, and then I'll follow up some more comments about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, good stuff. We cannot hook an internet connection up to a branch or data center without having to consider those very basic things like intrusion prevention and detection services, um, web content filtering, application control. Uh, you know, we just have gone past a day where we could throw in a firewall and say, yeah, we're good to go. So we have to be equipped. So, part of the idea around SD-WAN being I'm sending the traffic to the corporate data center that needs to go. But if I have internet traffic, whether it be, software as a service, cloud application, or just regular internet browsing, that I may just offload that right there at the branch. I don't need to tunnel all that traffic back to my corporate data center to traverse the corporate firewall. So if we're doing that though, like we have to be equipped for that purpose. So Aruba has done a good job building in that intrusion prevention, web content filtering, application filtering, and then on top of what Bill was saying, right down to the user level, being able to very granularly control from a template standpoint what users. And I say users, I use that word kind of loosely because a user can be a workstation or it can actually be a person. But a user can actually act on or do even to the corporate data center or to the internet, whichever way that may be.
Yeah, and oftentimes when we think about network security, particularly as it pertains to the internet, is um, we think about guarding the boundaries of the network, or the place where our private network interfaces with the public internet or with another service provider. But one of the things that these solutions help you practically deliver is protecting the device right where it connects, and not only protect the device, but protect you from the device, because more and more people are using their network for HVAC controls and for printers and copiers and security cameras and things that might be outside of your direct management control, depending on who provides those services to you. And it's necessary to allow them on your network, but it's also prudent to apply the appropriate policy to make sure that those devices only have access to the things on your network that you need. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that, but they become pretty complicated pretty fast. And this ability to apply policy on each device, because you have the ability to recognize what it is or the ability to recognize who it is and then respond with the appropriate policy, just gives you a lot of power and control and allows you to provide comprehensive protection to your network.
To that end, Bill, IoT, Internet of Things, they're writing all these interfaces that are now on our Wi-Fi. I'm sure they're on your home Wi-Fi for sure, but I'm not certain that we can confidently say that security is the foremost thought in their mind as they're developing these applications. And so they do recognize a fairly significant security exposure for us. And I just wanted to mention that because in relation to what Bill's saying, when that device comes onto the network, we identify that device and say, you can only do this. You cannot talk to my inside network. You can only talk to the internet. And even as granularly as maybe we're only going to let you talk to a certain subset of websites or something to that effect.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, God forbid if a printer is hacked or something like that, then you kind of just can shut it off at the source with the SD-WAN. So
Or a
that's
refrigerator.
Yeah, HVAC system, yeah, all kinds of things, yeah.
Right.
Alrighty, so gentlemen, we're wrapping up our time here. So let's get some final thoughts on SD-WAN. Bill? Oh, Bill, you're muted.
Bill, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I
No
hope we've been
problem.
able to highlight some of the value proposition of SD-WAN and how it may allow your business to be more versatile and hopefully more profitable at the same time. We do have a lot of experience dealing with carriers and great knowledge of the services that are available in the areas we serve, and would love the opportunity to continue this conversation and make it more specific as to how it might be suitable for your business. One thing that I don't think we covered, I wanted to emphasize is we talked about how you might extend, how SD-WAN might be beneficial as you interact with the cloud and with remote users, and I'll take a couple minutes to expound on that. A lot of people are now considering moving their IT infrastructure to the cloud, as a infrastructure as a service type offering, and that might mean moving your server and storage functionality to the cloud. And a lot of the providers that deliver that type of facility have some native interfaces to allow you to connect your network with their network, and that's more of the site-to-site VPN technology in a lot of cases. You also have the option of deploying the SD-WAN solution within the cloud as a virtual device in the cloud, and allowing it to seamlessly look like the rest of your network, where you have the ability to provide all that resiliency and functionality in a very similar way that you provide it to all of your other locations. And then going over to the remote worker functionality, for most of us, a VPN client is a manageable situations. A lot of us are using soft phones today, but there are still people that prefer to use regular desk phones and need printers and things of that nature. And sometimes VPN client, software-based VPN clients can make that more complicated. The Aruba SD-WAN experience allows you to deploy very small, cost-effective access points in people's homes even, so that they can get a true network-like experience from their home that's managed by the same policy and within the same pane of glass, as Jason mentioned, that the rest of your network resources are managed under.
Yeah, I think that's a great aspect, especially now, it's nice to move when you're working from home virtually. It's nice to move and feel like you never left the office, have the same functionalities for sure. So, Jason, your final thoughts?
Sure. I'd like to echo what Bill said. We have fairly large depth of knowledge here. Bill and I are only a couple of members of the networking team here at NetGain, and we have other guys that would also would love to talk to you about your challenges and issues you might be having along that front. I did want to kind of loop back to something I think we kind of missed, just the idea of what SD-WAN is, because there may be somebody on the call today that um, or somebody that's watching this after this is over that may be thinking, well, you all have talked about branch to branch this whole time, but my business is only one location. And what I want to say is SD-WAN can help you as well. So for a long time now, we've been able to aggregate bandwidth inside of firewalls, whether that's an ASA or something like that. But they haven't been very efficient. They haven't been very efficient in utilizing both connections at once or steering traffic. We just haven't been able to do that very well. In the new SD-WAN solutions, that's exactly what we are accomplishing. So even for your single site folks out there that want more bandwidth, want more bandwidth, or two, want the resiliency that multiple carriers bring to the table, these solutions cater to you as well.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, gentlemen. Real quick, we are going to go ahead and take some questions in these last few minutes, so feel free to submit any last questions that you have to the questions panel, and I'll go ahead and start with our first questions. So this first one here, I'm going to kick it over to Jason first. But there are, carriers like AT&T and Windstream, they sell SD-WAN. So why would a company purchase an SD-WAN solution versus going with one of these carriers, I think is what the question is asking.
Sure. So one of the carrier contracts, and that's exactly what they are, the contracts for a term of time, or basically leasing the bandwidth. The carriers want to just add their SD-WAN solution in, which a lot of times does not adequately address the security, the protection of your organization, from a perimeter perspective, like I said earlier, anytime we're putting an internet connection into a business, we need to have basic protections that should be foundational in the solution. So they want to lease you that. That lease is typically whatever the term of the contract is. You'll find that the spend is much higher over time than if you outright purchase it. In conjunction with that, if your contract is coming up with your carrier, I advise you to shop. Bandwidth is a little bit like insurance these days. It has been commoditized. And so, in the same way we tend to shop for car insurance when every 6 months to a year or 2 years or what have you, or when the rates get out of control, you should shop for bandwidth in the same fashion, because you're going to find that there's potential serious cost savings there for you to realize. Most solutions don't go into a business without some sort of return on investment. And that's our responsibility as IT professionals, is to bring value to our organizations as we evaluate and as we advise our executive management and our owners on solutions. So handing them a return on investment that very quickly returns the spend on the solution is going to make a big impact on them. Will make a bit about your ability to be able to provide them the solutions that your business needs, and how you can help deliver that to the business you serve today.
Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, for sure. So Jason talked a lot about the value proposition of to be cautious of in regard to the carriers, and I think there's also a lot of the story that has to do with reliability and flexibility. Is that one of the things that I like best about SD-WAN is giving yourself to be autonomous from a carrier and taking back control of your connectivity yourself. So that gives you the option to use additional bandwidth, which even a lot of the carrier-based SD-WAN solutions, they'll give you that, but they're still the same lethargic support structure that you've had to deal with on all of your other services. And I just think that that is important to consider as you figure out what the paradigm that you're going to shift to is trying to give yourself more control and more flexibility than what you've had with your previous solution. And Jason and I both probably can attribute the coloring of our hair a great deal to having to deal with carriers over the past 25 years.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you all. Yeah, thank you all so much for answering that question. Looks like we are wrapping up our time here. We don't want to, take up any more time of the audience if they've got to get somewhere else. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining.